An epic fantasy world doesn't just spring to life overnight. From Bag End to Eregion, here's an in-depth look behind the scenes of the entire Lord of the Rings franchise. Forth, Eorlingas!
For Frodo.
At the end of The Return of the King, Aragorn leads the armies of the West to the Black Gate of Mordor, where he challenges Sauron, only to be surrounded by the Dark Lord's armies. In the battle that follows, he goes toe-to-toe with a huge armored troll. That troll was a CGI product, but interestingly enough, when Viggo Mortensen was filming that scene, he didn't know that. He thought he was fighting Sauron himself. Peter Jackson revealed that they planned on having a bright white figure meant to represent Sauron's angelic guise as Anatar come to face Aragorn, which would then turn into the tall black-armored version of Sauron. Jackson ultimately decided that he wanted to focus more on Frodo and Sam as they entered Mount Doom with the One Ring, and so the Sauron part of the scene was cut. We still see remnants of Sauron's appearance in the final film, like the bright angelic light that washes over Aragorn, Gandalf, and Legolas when the Morgul host is gathered for battle. And Aragorn's fight with the troll still mirrors his battle against Sauron. The production team just animated the troll over the on-set stuntman dressed in Sauron's armor. In the extended edition of The Return of the King, the climactic battle at the Black Gate is briefly preluded by a negotiation scene with Sauron's representative, a nameless figure fittingly called the Mouth of Sauron. Played by Bruce Spence, the character is sort of a half-priest, half-warrior figure with a helmet that covers the top half of his face so that only his gigantic mouth is visible. The helmet is real, and makeup and prosthetics created the appearance of split skin around his mouth.
The idea that every time he spoke, his language was so evil that it would crack the lips or the skin of his face.
Despite the grisly makeup, the footage didn't wow Peter Jackson when he came to edit it. He tried digitally turning the mouth sideways, but it still didn't hit the spot. In the end, he kept the mouth horizontal, but the VFX team at Weta Digital enlarged it by about 200% for extra creepiness.
I was really pleased with the way that the effect worked because it gives you this uneasy sense that something's weird.
Nobody's downplaying the amount of skill and planning that went into bringing the LOTR trilogy to life, but some of the most enduring elements happened almost by chance. Case in point, Andy Serkis.
Action.
Got away today, precious. Not this time.
The original plan for Gollum was to make the creature entirely in CGI and just get a voice actor on set for a few weeks. But when Peter Jackson saw Serkis in action, everything changed. Realizing that, in creating the voice, Serkis also embodied every physical element of Gollum, he decided to use motion capture to bring the character to life.
That's my gob of spit. It's mine, my own, my precious gob of spit.
Anyway, it's safe to say that The Lord of the Rings wouldn't have been the same without the incredible motion capture work of Serkis. But what's even more impressive is that he had to film many of his scenes twice. After filming with the other actors, he would re-perform each part on a motion capture stage. Doing this in a contained studio space creates stable conditions, which makes it much easier to get motion capture to work properly. At one point, he even had to redo a scene years later in Peter Jackson's house. It's probably safe to assume that Serkis preferred shooting on a studio stage rather than on location, because he had to contend with some very challenging conditions. For the scene where Gollum tries to go fishing with his bare hands in a shallow stream, Serkis was throwing himself over the rocks and sliding through the water wrestling with an imaginary fish. And that wasn't a sunny, warm day the way it looks in the movie. When the crew arrived on set, it had unexpectedly snowed the night before, so the crew spent hours melting the snow in the immediate area just to clear enough space to film the sequence. Serkis donned some thermals and jumped into the cold water to get the shot, which is a testament to his dedication. Sometimes, acting takes genuine sacrifice, and it's even more admirable when the actor in question won't even be seen in the final film.
That's movie magic.
One of the issues with CGI characters is that, while you can use an actor for their voice and can even capture their motions, it's hard to make close-ups of their face believable. It's that lack of human expression that cranks up the uncanny valley element to 11. So the Lord of the Rings franchise took motion capture further than ever to capture the facial expressions of Andy Serkis in incredible detail. While Gollum has impressive facial expressions in both trilogies, it's The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey where the technique hits its peak.
Blesses and splashes, precious. That's a meaty mouthful.
By the very end of Return of the King, the technology had advanced far enough that the motion capture team was able to get what they needed on set without retreating to a special warehouse. and it continued to advance in the years leading up to the filming of An Unexpected Journey. That allowed Circus, painted with tracker dots on his face and a dedicated camera helmet to capture his expressions, to act in real time with Martin Freeman.
What have I got in my pocket?
Not far! Not far!
Hobbits are short, wizards are tall. That simple contrast created plenty of headaches for the Lord of the Rings crew. How do you get two actors who are roughly human-sized to look normal when one of those characters only comes up to the other's waist? There were some digital solutions to that problem, but actually fewer than you'd think. Most of the time, the effect was achieved through body doubles or forced perspective. Gandalf's arrival in the Shire during the Fellowship of the Ring is a perfect example of non-digital wizardry used to convey those size differences. To shrink Elijah Wood and help Ian McKellen stand out, the production crew had to build a unique seat on the wagon so that Wood was actually sitting several feet behind McKellen. Filmed at the right angle, though, the wagon bench appears seamless, giving the impression that a much smaller Frodo is sitting hip to hip with Gandalf.
Your eye tricks your brain, and you kind of think that these two people are side by side.
A similar contraption was made for the scene in which Gandalf visits Bag End to talk with Frodo. Frodo boils water and pours the wizard some tea. The two characters appear to be interacting across a rectangular table and looking each other in the eye as they talk, but they're actually in different parts of the room. In this case, the table was made out of two pieces, each built to a different scale, and Wood is standing further away as he pretends to engage with McKellen. The production team even developed a technique to move props like the table in the opposite direction to a moving camera shot to ensure that the visual is maintained during a motion shot. As a matter of fact, every time Gandalf was in Bag End, production had to pull out every trick in the bag to make sure the perspective was right. He crouches through the hobbit-sized door, bumps up against the chandelier, and generally lurches around, being too big for everything. Each shot came with its challenges. Forced perspective was used in some instances, but the task of scaling Ian McKellen to an appropriate size in the Baggins residence took more than a custom-made kitchen table and some carefully chosen lines of sight. The crew actually built two versions of the interior of Bag End on a soundstage, one larger to make the hobbits seem undersized, and one smaller to give Gandalf the appropriate sense of gigantism. Depending on the needs of the scene, one of the actors would be filmed in the physical set, while the other would time their actions on a blue screen to match what the other was doing. Then, all the editors had to do was blend the two shots together.
No one knows it's here, do they?
Turn.
Do they, Gandalf?
Some of the tricks were even more low-tech than that. There were scale doubles for the actors, and two versions of all the props were built, one sized for Bilbo or Frodo, and one for Gandalf. In some shots, McKellen just stood on raised platforms to make him look taller. Regardless of which particular trick was used at any given time, it all comes together seamlessly in the finished film, giving no hint at all the effort that went into making the Bag End scenes. One of the most memorable moments in the Fellowship of the Ring is when the Fellowship is trying to scale the mountain pass of Caradhras in a growing snowstorm. Everyone struggles in the deep snow except for one person, Legolas. This detail comes directly from the book, where Tolkien wrote that Legolas sprang nimbly over the snow. Doing this without a ton of CGI was almost stupidly simple. The mountain pass was created on a soundstage with fake snow. A deep pathway was created for the actors playing the non-elven characters to battle through, while the raised edges were solid, allowing Orlando Bloom to walk beside the rest of the Fellowship while seemingly not impacting the snow. Wonder, majesty, fear. There are lots of words that you can use to describe the ancient, abandoned underground dwarven ruins of Moria. But before special effects were added, the set for most of the Moria scenes was pretty underwhelming. The sequences on the stairs of Khazad Dûm were mostly achieved through blue screen, compositing, and massive, highly detailed miniatures.
They use shot after shot after shot. It's like almost a 3-minute section of the film is filmed continuously inside this model.
Then there's the Great Hall of Dorodelf, a space filled with massive, intricately carved pillars holding up a distant roof.
Well, there's an eye-opener and no mistake.
In reality, the set only had a handful of half-built pillars and statues that they could use to film around over and over again for the different scenes in the heart of the abandoned dwarven realm. One of the most iconic scenes from The Lord of the Rings is when the newly formed Fellowship of the Ring gathers in one shot for the first time after the Council of Elrond before they head south on their quest to destroy the One Ring.
9 companions.
So be it. You shall be the Fellowship of the Ring.
Except they weren't actually together for that iconic shot of the Fellowship coming together. It was that pesky size difference again. For close-ups in both that scene and other similar setups, Jackson was able to get away with having the hobbits just stand on their knees. But that classic single shot of everyone in frame was a composite of 2 different shots. Again, it's a deceptively simple way to achieve an incredible effect.
Right. Where are we going?
One of the most impressive elements of the Lord of the Rings films is the sets. Many of these are enhanced by CGI, but usually they're at least partially built in real life. The crew invested countless hours into building miniature sets that were still massive despite their shrunken size. In fact, the crew even came up with their own name for these big miniatures: bigatures.
Because over half of the miniatures that we built at the Weta workshop were the size of sound stages.
The biggest of these was a Minas Tirith replica made at a 122:1 scale. Despite scaling things down, the build was still a robust 23 feet tall and 21 feet in diameter. The level of detail was astounding, with over 1,000 handmade houses visible throughout the city. And that wasn't the only Minas Tirith replica. Portions of the Tower of Guard were built at a 14:1 scale as well, right down to the tiniest details to give a more lifelike appearance to those zoomed-in shots. And that was just for the wide shots. Major portions of the city were also built at full scale.
I always think around this corner of Minas Tirith there's going to be a little pizza parlor and a jewelers and a open-air cafe.
According to Weta Workshop founder and creative director Richard Taylor, a total of 72 miniatures were created for the original trilogy. Another impressive miniature was made for Helm's Deep. When it was finished, it was over 16 feet tall, 32 feet wide, and nearly 40 feet deep. Construction on the scaled miniature began 3.5 years before filming began, back when Miramax was developing the Tolkien adaptation.
So here we are in Helm's Deep. This model will be used for the animatics, but it will also be used for the movie too.
When production hit a snag, Taylor was ordered to chainsaw the miniature into pieces and put it into storage. Weta delayed taking such a drastic step, and at the last minute, the project was saved by New Line Cinema, so the impressive miniature was preserved for the shoots. Aragorn's recruitment of the Army of the Dead is a lot more in-depth in the extended version of The Return of the King. It ends with a huge pile of skulls bursting out of the wall and cascading over Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. There was plenty of digital trickery at work here, but not entirely in the way you'd think. All those skulls were actually real. To create the effect of thousands upon thousands of skulls realistically tumbling over the actors, Jackson first filmed Aragorn and Gimli in real time getting pummeled with life-size skulls in front of a blue screen.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Then the crew filmed it all again using a scaled-down model and miniature skulls. How many skulls? The prop crew started with 200, but quickly realized it was nowhere near enough. They kept making more, finally settling for around 80,000 mini-skulls in total. These 2 pieces were then layered to get both the close-ups and wide shots in the final product. With all that work, it's a shame it never made the theatrical cut of the film.
It is a strange fate that we should suffer so much fear and doubt over so small a thing.
Peter Jackson's employment of forced perspective extended to props too, most notably the One Ring. While life-size versions were cast for the actors to use in regular scenes, there was also a gigantic version of the ring. Placed the right distance from the camera, this created a more magnified and dramatic shot for close-ups. It captured reflections better and gave the One Ring a bigger presence on the screen. One example of this being done was the shot of the One Ring falling off Frodo's neck in the snow, and it's shown briefly sitting on the icy ground with members of the Fellowship off in the distance. The giant prop was later used for the scene at the beginning of Return of the King, where Smeagol and Deagle fight over the freshly discovered ring. Like Andy Serkis before him, Benedict Cumberbatch lent more than this voice to the wholly CGI character Smaug. He actually voiced 2 characters across the Hobbit trilogy, Smaug and the Necromancer, but his work for Smaug was particularly impressive. The British actor went all out, donning a motion capture suit and acting out the dragon's movements while he provided the lines. Without context, it looks pretty bizarre, but the end result was one of the best sequences in the otherwise middling Hobbit trilogy, the confrontation between Bilbo and Smaug.
You have nice manners for a liar and a thief.
One of the most memorable moments in Tolkien's The Hobbit is when Bilbo helps the dwarves escape the dungeons of the Wood Elves by packing them into barrels that are shipped down a nearby river, right to the doorstep of the Lonely Mountain. When Peter Jackson adapted the scene, he chose to spruce it up a bit, and by a bit, we mean a lot. orcs are chasing and shooting at them. Legolas, Tauriel, and the elves are also scrambling around the edges of the violent river, using the dwarven heads as stepping stones and performing more than a few literally unbelievable feats of acrobatic archery. The barrel chase sequence is wild enough with the digital effects added in. Take them out though, and it just looks straight up insane. Filmed both in a real river and in a controlled sluice, the sequence was stitched together from multiple different elements. Orlando Bloom filmed many of his shots in a completely green set as green-clad crew members operated a pair of seesaws to mimic the movement of barrels in the river around him. It took multiple green screen sets, gimbals, seesaws, and wire setups to get everything they needed. In several shots, Bloom wasn't even there. There were multiple points where they had to use a fully CGI version of the character, and in those cases, they brought in Bloom's stunt double, Alan Smith.
If we can't get Orlando Bloom, we really do have the next best thing on the planet.
Smith would put on the all-too-familiar dot-covered motion capture gear to film shots of Legolas firing off arrows and taking out orcs on a soundstage. The goal was to deliver on Peter Jackson's vision of trying to make even the full CGI scenes feel like they could have been filmed in real life. The final results are questionable, but the attempt was an admirable one. The ending of The Desolation of Smaug involves a lengthy CGI-heavy sequence of Smaug chasing the Dwarven Company through the halls of Erebor beneath the Lonely Mountain. The whole sequence was filmed by Peter Jackson, and when we say filmed, we mean he actually walked around a gigantic performance capture stage with a camera filming, well, nothing. The effects team made a rough render of the entire chase scene, which Jackson could see playing out on his, quote, camera, which was really a view screen with motion capture points of reference.
Which was ultimately a way in which I could get into the middle of a digital world of action with a camera myself.
Basically, Jackson could see the scene playing out through his camera, while a computer tracked the camera itself as Jackson moved it around, letting him get the angles that he wanted in real time.
Oh, he's going faster than me. Let's not save that.
The result was a completely digital Smaug that was essentially filmed with Jackson's eye for motion and larger-than-life action.
Sound effects always help. For some reason, I don't know why, they always help.
The climax of an unexpected journey sees Bilbo, Gandalf, and the dwarves cornered by the Pale Orcs' forces at the edge of a precipice. In a last-ditch effort to save themselves, they scale a bunch of pine trees to escape the onslaught of wargs, and Gandalf joins the effort by magicking some pine cones to firebomb the orcs. There are a lot of moments in the Hobbit trilogy where it's hard to figure out what, if anything, is real. Sometimes the answer is barely anything. In this instance, the gang had a set built in front of a green screen with a handful of trees on it. Ian McKellen, on the other hand, had a platform with a single treetop. His job was to grab pinecone props with LED lights and throw them off screen. Not ideal conditions for acting, you say? McKellen would likely agree.
Say 3, 2, 1, crash. Just tell me what happens, and then I'll try and do it without you telling me.
Unfortunately, that wasn't the only time Gandalf got frustrated filming the Hobbit movies. For the bag-end scenes in The Fellowship of the Ring, Ian McKellen had to deal with forced perspective angles and uncomfortable lines of sight with his fellow actors. It was tough, but he still had fellow professionals to work with and real-time lines to react to. McKellen's experience when he returned for the Hobbit franchise was downright awful by comparison. Since they were filming in 3D, a lot of the forced perspective tricks wouldn't hold up on camera. Their new technique involved McKellen filming his scenes alone in a green set while the dwarves simultaneously acted out the same scene in the finished bag-end set. 2 linked camera rigs filmed both in real time at different scales. And it's not a stretch to say that it was an isolating experience spending days at a time in a green purgatory with no other actors around. In fact, it drove him to tears. During one take, he just couldn't handle it anymore and broke down.
Everybody could hear me muttering to myself about how I wanted to go home and so on. You ready?
Peter Jackson explained that they felt bad leaving McKellen dumped in green screen land, and after McKellen considered leaving the movie and acting for good, the crew organized a Gandalf Appreciation Day to let him know how much his work meant for the film. Considering what went into it, the finished scene really is something of a technical marvel that took precise timing to pull off, not to mention more than a little encouragement for the resident Istar.
I'm sorry, everybody.
No, sorry. It's impossibly difficult.
The Hobbit movies are sort of a conundrum. The appendices for the trilogy are actually just as fascinating as those for the Lord of the Rings films, but one thing you'll notice right off the bat is a whole lot more green screen. Still, despite early reports, there were plenty of real sets for the actors to work on. For the shadowy enclaves of Mirkwood, production designers built a large set of misshapen trees for the dwarves to wander through.
You must stay on the path. Do not leave it. If you do, you'll never find it again.
In fact, the set was so large, twisted, and maze-like that the cast and crew occasionally got lost while they were trying to set up scenes. This also included a set based on limbs high up in the trees for Martin Freeman to balance on while he tried to free the dwarves who had been cocooned by the 8-legged spawn of Ungoliant.
Yeah, oops.
When the adrenaline's going.
When the adrenaline's going, your balance comes back.
How anyone could keep a straight face doing some of the ridiculous things they had to do while filming the Hobbit movies is a mystery. In the Battle of the Five Armies, Legolas and Tauriel ride into the ruins of Dale on horseback. It doesn't look any different than any other sequence in the film, but behind the scenes it was, well, comical. They did a bit of real horse work, but most of the sequence was done on a green mechanical blob, on which they had to pretend to gallop through the city cutting down orcs. Again, just another day on set, but this time, well...
We were told to sort of exaggerate the horse riding movements.
At least it gave everyone a good laugh, including the actors themselves. The behind-the-scenes footage went viral and is arguably more fun to watch than the finished scene.
Sorry.
Compared to the original trilogy, and even the green screen heavy Hobbit trilogy, the behind-the-scenes looks at Prime Video's Rings of Power are less epic, to put it one way. That is, unless you really like watching digital elements drop into place over digital backgrounds. And to be fair, the show's VFX really does stand out. There are moments where Rings of Power really does look like $1 billion bucks. But although there are precious few behind-the-scenes looks into the Amazon series, a few glimpses do show a surprising number of physical sets behind the glossy digital enhancements. For example, the Season 2 scene of Anatar unleashing a bit of his darkness was filmed on a soundstage with the background added in later, which made it a simple matter of dimming the lights on set to lay the foundation for the digital touch-ups later. And the eerie orange hellscape following the eruption of Mount Doom was also blocked out on a soundstage that closely matched the finished scene, although teams of color correctors still went in to tweak the final product. When Prime Video announced that it would be creating a series that focused on Second Age Middle-earth, one of the expectations was that it would cover the forging of, well, the Rings of Power.
Do we proceed?
No. We must make 3.
The end of Season 1 saw the forging of the 3 Elven Rings, and although it looks real enough, the VFX team did some seriously heavy lifting to make that happen. The forge's coals are backlit plastic rocks, and the crucible is entirely empty throughout the entire sequence. A scene breakdown from Outpost VFX shows the huge amount of work that went into building realistic flames and molten metal. Basically, if something looks hot in that scene, they're responsible. The forging of the Dwarven Rings in Season 2 followed the same format, with digital layers applied over the empty chambers and channels where Sauron supposedly pours the strength and will to govern each race. So there you have it, folks. The chains of enslavement for all of Middle-earth, and all it took was a few computerized layers to bring them to life.
That's movie magic.